Hello everyone and welcome to today's painting demonstration. My name is Leah and I teach acrylic painting every week on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you a spooky Halloween type forest. It doesn't necessarily have to be Halloween, but I have added some somewhat festive bats in the background. Now I have included the reference photo for this demonstration, but I have to warn you, we are taking a far departure. A lot of the reference photos that I use for these demonstrations are more like inspiration photos. I see something, I like it, I think I can do something with that, and then the entire thing is remixed into a composition that is often more suitable for either our layout or our purposes. So I spent a lot of time last night exploring some spooky shapes for the demonstration for this week and for next week. And so this is going to be what I came up with out of that research. I'm really happy with this composition. I'm really happy with the bat shapes. You can reference these batty guys on the Discord server where the reference photo is. Go ahead and use those if you like. I have laid out some really strategic pencil. The moon, you'll notice I did trace a circle to get it that perfectly round, but then I went and I took an eraser and I did some blending because I don't want that hard line there. That's going to be a very soft blend from the moon glow to the sky. So make sure that any pencil that you put down, you wouldn't hate it if you still saw a little remnant of it in the final piece. You don't want to be layering paint over paint just to get rid of some sort of pencil line that you weren't quite satisfied with. So everything here I'm pretty happy with. I'm going to erase anything that I'm not happy with. If anything, all the dark pencil is going to be covered with dark paint. It's the most important things so that I don't forget to include these original things that made me feel really inspired to do this painting. So we got our paper, we got our pencil on there, and now we're going to do our underpainting. And starting with the darkest value first, I'm going to use a large filbert brush and the burnt sienna paint. And there are some darkest areas. Our moonlight is going to be reflecting in this murky pond, and the murky pond is going to disappear into fog that's going to go up these trees. This foreground is going to be the absolute darkest value for sure. And the water in front of it's going to be quite dark as well. Everything else will be lighter with the exception of the bats. The brush strokes for the water, I'm going to make sure that they're horizontal. I don't like mirror-like reflections in my water. I like to add a little bit of movement. Not only is it more forgiving to paint in that way, but it adds style. So I'm moving up into those trees and I'm going to lighten up that paint with just water. I'm not going to worry too much about being specific in staying in those tree shapes. This is just the underpainting. it's doing two things. We're establishing values, we're covering up the white, oh, I guess three things, and then kind of cementing in the graphite into the paper, so it won't mix up into your paint after that first layer. It will be sealed in. I didn't bother penciling in a lot of these small branches that are going to be on these foreground trees. That's just going to be something I decide on the fly. Okay, now the darkest part of the sky is going to be on the upper left in the corner. And that's going to go lighter, lighter, lighter all the way to where I would imagine the setting sun would have been over on the right side, close to the horizon. Now I'm going to rinse out my brush pretty well. Grab just the tiniest amount of cadmium yellow. And then over the lightest areas of the paper that was just white, I'm going to put that yellow. It's going to make our horizon line glow, our moon glow, and then the moon's reflection. Maybe a little bit over on this side behind these trees, and where that fog is really going to be thick on top of the water. Okay, there we go. That's already looking pretty darn Halloween-y. It's all orange and black. That was the end of our underpainting process. Now I'm going to put away that large filbert. So I'm going to paint in the sky, and I'm deciding that we're going to use our small filbert brush, not the flat, not quite yet. Now, last night I decided I wanted this to be a little bit teal. I'm going to use the cerulean blue, a touch of yellow. I want it a little bit darker, so some ultramarine. And now a little bit of white. There we go. Without completely obscuring where those tree branches and or trunks are going to be, I'm going to paint the upper left corner. I like that color. That is a nice complement to the orange. And I might have to mix some more of that. But as the sky wraps around to the right side of our composition, it's going to get progressively lighter. That's just something to keep in mind. I'm taking those three colors again, the cerulean blue, the ultramarine, and the cadmium yellow, just a touch of it to make that green. Add a little bit more white. Now I feel like I have enough paint to get myself through this. Also, as you approach the moon, it's going to get lighter still. But of course, you can add a halo to the moon after this color is dry, and that's okay too. Now, if at any point you remix something and it's just a little off, like noticeably off, just go ahead and incorporate it into the other areas. If you're using a filbert brush with the soft edges and just dabbing with your paintbrush, or using a circular stroke, then it will mix in just fine, even though the paint's dry. Adding a bit more yellow and white. That same dabbing action right around the moon. That's the foundation of the halo that we're going to be making. Painting up to those bat shapes, but I'm going to try to make sure that I can still see them after the fact. I think I will. If you put a little bit of water in your paint before you go over your bats, the paint will be more transparent when it's dry. Then you may be able to see it a little bit better. Adding a little bit more white again as I'm coming to the horizon. Mixing a little bit more paint for me. I'm going to start in the upper right corner and then drag down. Now what I would like to do is have some kind of eerie golden clouds, but they're going to be closer to the tops of the trees. Let's see if I can pull it off with the color that I decided to make the sky. Still using the same brushstroke movements. Tiny circular little circles or partial circles. It's like if you were to do a gentle scrub. Okay, now that the entire sky area is covered, I see that the area around the moon is pretty dry, so I can go ahead and start adding that halo effect. I got most of the paint rinsed out of my small filbert brush. I'm going to go over to the white. And right inside the moon, I am going to really push the paint on. I'm not going to put a thick layer. In fact, that was a little too much paint. Because I want the edges to be soft, so I'm going to dry brush drag them around the edge, around the outer diameter. Adding a little bit of water, going back to that outside edge, a little bit more water. Blending, blending, blending. And then the very, very outside, and I'm gonna do the little circle scrub, incorporating that lighter color into the background sky. Very good. And since I put that paint on really thin, you can see that glowy underpainting color. There's just one edge. There we go, that I want to clean up a bit. And maybe right there too. Good. Okay, now the rest of the sky is pretty well dry. Burnt sienna, a little bit of cadmium yellow light, and some white. Small amounts of paint here. If you are using a wet palette, as I do recommend that you do, then you can mix these tiny amounts of paint and not worry about them drying. And then you can do what I call branch mixing, which is you mix a pile of paint and then you can mix another pile right on top of it, and then branch off, make a lighter version, make a darker version, and all of it stays wet and easy for you to go back to. So I definitely recommend you do that. And you can make your own. You can make your own wet palette. You don't have to go buy the whole thing. Although, I feel like the smaller size wet palette is a affordable option. Delivers very good value. All right, now that gold color that I just created from the bottom, the horizon line, circular brush strokes. And I'm just gonna dry brush, drag that around a bit. A little bit behind the bats. Maybe we add like a little spooky cloud above the moon. Adding a little bit of white, and on only the lower clouds, the ones that would be near the setting sun, we're going to get a little bit lighter. If you feel like you put too much paint down, you can really quickly rinse off your brush, dry it off really quick on a paper towel, and then blend the edges. You can also grab what I call the oopsie brush, which will be clean, and just you know, get it in some water really, really quickly and blend what you just put down. I am lightening up the clouds on the moon side. I think that's a nice touch. We want all of this sky work to be done before we start doing any of these branches on the trees. I'm grabbing just a little bit more burnt sienna. I'm going to make the far side of these clouds a little bit richer with the orange. I think it'll make a nice accent. Just a little bit behind this super stylish bat. And then I think we will be ready to go to the next step. Very good. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to tackle those far background evergreen trees. I'm going to put away this filbert brush and grab the 1/4 inch flat. Now you can branch this tree color off of the sky. I'm going to add some ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna. We're looking for a medium dark but muted blue color. So now I'm dragging in a little bit of the white because it's a little too dark. I don't want this to be the darkest value. I want the foreground to be the darkest and these foreground trees to be almost black. And they're going to have a lot of lead lines that go towards the bats. But the darkest of this evergreen trees is going to be the one that's directly in front of the moon, and I'm going to start with that one. It's the most visually important. Now I sharpened up my flat brush in the palette, and I'm using the thin edge. Drawing that vertical line down, and then I'm going to start at the very tip and work my way down. Okay, now the neighboring tree. Now I'm just going to do the top part of the tree because as we come down to the top of what would be this imaginary vague water line right here, it's going to get lighter, 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 lighter to the lightest point, almost as bright as the moon, is going to be right in this zone. But right now I don't want to focus on that at all. I'm just focusing on the forms of these distant, somewhat spooky evergreen trees. The moon is the focal point of this image, so you just want to make sure that those shapes are looking the way you want them. Try to make sure that your evergreen trees are not too symmetrical, or at least if they are symmetrical, because that's the feel you're going for, which is fine. A lot of evergreen trees are pretty darn mirrorable. Then you want to make sure that the interval in between each tree is a little bit different. Like, don't put them like every half an inch there's a tree. And if you do that, totally fixable. Don't worry too much about it. Then you can just see here, add something, even if it's one that's just has branches, like an old snag tree that has not fallen over. These are often overlooked parts of the forest. The trees that are in different stages of their existence. Back here on the left side of these foreground trees, the evergreen background line just disappears right into the sky, and I kind of like that. That's not going to pull your attention at all. Don't be afraid to change the habit of the trees also. If you study different types of evergreen trees, you'll get different forms. You'll get branches that reach up, branches that reach down, the ones that droop, like cedar trees. Cedar trees are very elegantly droopy. And a lot of forests have all of those intermixed. Now I'm going to get a little bit lighter on this side, so I'm going to add white to our smoky blue. And I'm going to blend back into the two previous trees that I painted on there. Just to make sure that that color is well mixed and incorporated in. And then continue to go on my tree line journey. almost here now. It's a little bit lighter on this side, which I like. I don't want these trees to pull your attention off the page. Just keeping it vague with some well-blended lines there. Okay, now as promised, fog. So I'm gonna add a little bit more white to the blue. I'm thinking we switch back to the filbert brush because the flat has too many sharp edges, which is wonderful for what we just did, which is make a bunch of little angular trees. I'm going back and forth between thick and thin lines. I love the flat brush for that. It is the most versatile of all the brushes, but filbert and fog are just best friends. So small filbert brush, going back to the blue mixture, same brush strokes as the sky. I need more of this color. In hindsight, I should have mixed a bunch of this, but that's okay. When you're using a limited palette, it is easy to remember how you mixed something, which again, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and a little bit of the cadmium yellow light. See where that gets us. If it's looking too saturated, a little bit of burnt sienna. Using those little semicircle brush strokes, go ahead and overlap where we had just painted. And then add a little bit of white. Start at the edge and work your way in, just in case you added too much. This looks good to me, so now I'm going to overlap again the area that we just put down. And just progressively all the way across the page and then down. Added a bit more white again, swirl, swirl, swirl. Even if you can see your paintbrush edges, it's not going to matter because it's going to have this billowy mist slash smoke shape to it, so it won't matter. I'm trying to keep these paint layers really, really thin, and that means that they're drying very quickly as well. More white again. Okay, so now I'm going to get all of that dark blue paint off of here because I'm going to use the lightest color of the fog right now. I'm going directly to the white. Small amount of white, and I'm going to start from what I believe should be the lightest point, which is right here. And I am going to dry brush swirl around the middle of the painting only. The middle third, about. A little bit more. Smaller area of the middle. And then a little bit more. Now this is a fun transition. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to put that filbert brush aside. I'm going to grab the flat, 1/4 inch flat, make sure that it's well rinsed out. That is the reason why I have 3 waters. I know you can only see the edge of my 3rd water, but I would rather have 3 different water containers, or 2, than one giant jug that gets slowly dirty over time. Because you always want the option of a clean rinse available to you. And since I'm painting very quickly and everything's drying very quickly, you need to be able to act in response. You want to have that clean water available. So now with the flat brush, I'm going into the white and horizontal strokes. I am going to gently bring them into the middle of the fog area. I'm going to make them seem as if they're gently emerging. But only for a bit is it going to be that light, because I'm going to go back into that smoky turquoise blue. And now, instead of using foggy circle strokes, I'm just going to be using vertical, or I'm sorry, long linear brush strokes across the water. Just gently painting around the land. Try not to leave any sharp edges. Now I do have the reflection of the moon all planned out for myself. And I really love the way those shapes are designed, so I'm going to try to paint around that. Don't be afraid to add some water to your brush while working on the water area. The transparency and adding more layers to this zone actually makes it look even more water-like. The translucence, the layers, And then transitioning color is just going to benefit that part. This is another reason why I like to focus on having such a thoroughly covered underpainting as well. These little areas where the paint is a bit transparent are going to reveal that warmth, and it's going to give your painting more depth. I am mixing more blue, but this time I was thinking of adding yellow, but I did not. Instead, I just went with the burnt sienna. I want this color to be a little darker and more muted coming into the foreground. Okay, now we're going to do the landmass. You go ahead and keep with your flat brush. I'm going to put burnt sienna on the edge of that blue area in our palette, and then ultramarine blue. It's about 50-50 on those two paint colors, and that's going to be your darkest dark. And when you put it on your painting, you will be impressed how dark that is. Now I'm mixing a little bit of burnt sienna and white onto that edge of that color. And then I'm going to do the top of our land, our land edge, our land top. I'm not a big fan of that brush stroke I just put down. That was like a, oh. And I just went to my clean water, wiped off my brush, and then blended that in, and it's like it never happened. Wonderful. I'm going to incorporate a little bit of that color into the rest of our land. I'm going to make sure that there are not a lot of hard edges with it. It's just to make some varying texture. I want it to stay dark and vague. I don't want too many hard lines that are going to pull your attention, because that is not leading to the focal point. There is no lead lines on the ground telling your eye where to go. So we can keep that all pretty big. All right, so if you don't have your darkest value mixed still, then you could go ahead and do that. That's the 50% ultramarine blue and the 50% burnt sienna. I'm still using my flat brush. I'm going to go ahead and do that for these trees. These are the foreground trees. Now the sky and your background evergreens, they should be pretty well dry. I'm going to start with the left side because I am right-handed. And as I move across my painting, I'm not going to, hopefully, drag my hand in paint. Now, if your flat brush isn't behaving, there's a couple things that could be happening. Either your paint is not quite fluid enough to do this, or you have to sharpen up your brush in the palette, or your flat is just not flat enough, in which case you could switch to a liner, a rigger, or a script brush, which I am going to be doing for these smaller branches. Try to make sure the base of your tree is a little bit thicker than the top of your tree. And then at the bottom, you kind of pull down some roots to incorporate that dark color into your landmass. Just make sure the base of that tree is not a flat rectangle. The brush stroke should be implying some sort of rooted base. Now, if you do have a part of your super long foreground tree that gets a little too thick in the middle, just go ahead and everything below that point, just thicken it up a bit. A little bit of undulation is no big deal. It's really about your preference and the positioning of the tree, if that even pulls your attention where it is. Okay, now everything from here on out is going to be a smaller branch, so I am going to switch over to my liner. I have a #1 liner on standby as part of my default small painting set. Go ahead and rinse it in water. Make sure you don't have any dog hair in it. And then go back over to your darkest value. I'm gonna need to mix more of that, so there we go. Rotate your liner in the palette to make sure that it's nice and sharp. I have one small tree here that I'm gonna attend to. Start at the base and then work your way out to the smallest points. I'm trying not to make my branches too polite. I have been critiqued before and told that my branches are too polite, and that means that they don't cross over each other enough. I thought that was kind of funny. I also feel like this could be a stylistic choice. But this is a Halloween themed painting, so I'm gonna try to make them not so evenly spaced. I mean, that problem could also fall into the even interval that we are always trying to avoid. Don't want to create any visual patterns that are unintended. Okay. When you're doing this part, just make sure to kind of sit back and take inventory of what you've done. Take a little bit of a stock of what you're doing. For these trees, I'm going to go ahead and put the bigger branches in first and then fill with the smaller ones. Just be aware of where your bats are going to be. I can't remember if I was going to put anything down here, but I'm feeling it needs it at this point, so yes. This tutorial is going to be a little bit longer than our normal Wednesday tutorial because I am painting an 8x10. The reason for that is I felt like this composition really needed to be more vertical than a square. All these layers going up, progressing up into the far distance. They needed a little bit more space to travel in. And vertical compositions just have more depth to them. There's further for your eye to travel into the background. Next week's Halloween painting is also going to have a lot of verticality to it. Also full moon, some different trees, and a different color palette. There's also going to be some pumpkins for our warm hit of color. may also be primarily cool. This painting definitely cool dominant, but you need those warms to add pops of interest. See, now I'm glad we added all this underbrush here. Now in the original inspiration photo, there are little orange leaves on some of these branches, but I don't know, I'm not sure. What I'm gonna do is I'll finish the reflection of the moon in the water and then finish the bats, and then we'll take inventory, visual inventory, and see if it needs it or not. I may add some more branches, but let's go to bat mode. Now I'm gonna keep on this liner brush. If you're not super confident with the liner brush and you're kind of scared of the dainty detail that's about to happen, you could use like a fine paint pen, and I won't tell anybody. I'm gonna start at the tip, the very, very edge of the bat wing, and then go around and then up the other wing. So I have that M shape, and then from the line that I've already painted, I'm going to pull down to each point, and then from that point pull to the next point. And once that outline is created, then you can fill and feel a little bit safer. Okay, now I'm sharpening up that brush before the next bat. If you put your wrist down, you're going to be a lot more steady. So just make sure everything's dry underneath where your wrist is. Okay, now along that top edge, and then to each point. Then to the other side. Fill in, and then that is bat number 2. Now, I really enjoy the form of bat number 3. So hopefully I can pull it off. This one's definitely Dracula. All right. Whew, that was scary. Okay. Now there was a couple parts where I went over the line, and you just make it a little bigger. That's okay. I think personally, it's better to keep your line sharp and a little bit bigger than you intended than to have some sort of blobby little guy hanging out there. Mostly because this is This is like a focal point area right here. The whole painting is leading you up to this spot, so anything there that's out of place is going to be a little bit more obvious. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Okay, now I can definitely see where I want to add more branches. I don't think I want to add any more to this area. I feel like that's looking pretty good. It's okay to be a little haphazard with the branches that go away from the focal point. Nobody's paying attention to those too much. If you feel like you're not getting a good amount of bristle control out of your liner, then add a little bit more water to it. Okay, taking stock here, feeling good on the amount of branches. These guys are kind of looking exactly the same, like little twinsies, so I'm going to change that up a bit. That human pattern recognition is very strong. Okay. Very good. Check your intervals. Make sure nothing is very patterny. There's still time to go ahead and fix that. Now I'm going to paint the reflection of the moon into the water. Everything down there should be nice and dry. Got my flat brush. A little bit of titanium white. And then I'm gonna smear that onto the area that is designated for it. Doesn't have to exactly follow this space, just the intended shape. A little bit of overlap and underlap will actually look kind of nice. Okay, very good. Now I'm going to add a little bit of negative shapes on our trees up here, the evergreen tree line. If you have any of that blue left over, go ahead and add some white to it, depending on where you are in the scene. I'm not going to add negative shapes to the periphery, just this middle third or so. If you have to warm it up with a touch of orange, go ahead. Really depends on where you want to put these shapes. Keep in mind where the trunks are as well. I'm going to bring these shapes right down into the fog. But as they come into the fog, I'm going to make them a little bit more vague. So I just grabbed some clean water, rinsed out my brush, and now I'm just blending them into the background of the fog. That looks good. So the journey that I want your eye to travel is to go enter through the bottom of the painting, which is quite common, up on this reflection, and then up into the fog, and then up the trees to the bats and the moon. And I feel like that is the journey that your eye is taking here. So that is successful. Now I'm not going to add the little fall leaves to these trees. It would just be intermittent, just a couple here and there. And in the reference photo or the inspiration photo, it looks nice, but there is so much more going on to the scene that we've created that I feel like it doesn't need it. There's lots of warmth coming from these little flecks of underpainting that are showing through. We added some warm puffy clouds that are circling that moon and adding like a really interesting ambiance. And I feel like there is enough going on everywhere that it feels good. I question this space right here as if maybe there could be some grass shape coming up. If you wanted to do this, and I might just do it, I feel like it's one of those things that I could easily stop right now, right in this moment, and it would be completely fine. But if you wanted to add the leaves, this is what you would do. The grass, not leaves. I'm going to take that dark color with the flat. Just make sure there's not a terrible amount of water in here. You can kind of tease the bristles apart from each other and just drag up a little bit. That'll give you just a little bit more variation. Doesn't have to be as dark as the trees. This grass could be pretty delicate. I'm just adding a little bit more texture. Spooky texture. You can do another layer with slightly more opaque paint, slightly darker. And I feel like that'll be even more convincing. And now we have a little bit more texture. You can see what that added. I messed up just a little bit and put some floating grass here now. This is the thing that you can do. If you have clean water and clean paper towel handy, just like it didn't happen. There you go. Now that's a good example of that. All right. that does it for our first spooky forest tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed that and that you're able to do something for yourself at home. Add a little bit of spooky Halloween ambiance to your living room area, maybe. And so thank you so much for coming and painting with me. And until next week, happy painting.